Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cheryl and I garden in Zone 8A, and today I'll be sharing 7 of my favorite flowering perennials that are easy to grow in most soil conditions and generally like at least some sun. So let's get started. For those who are new to gardening, there are typically 2 types of plants you can buy when you go to a garden center or nursery. They're annuals or perennials. And as their name suggests, the annuals are plants that typically last one season, and the perennials are the plants that return year after year. While it may take more than one season for some perennials to flower, they do tend to get hardier and larger as time goes by. So let's get started on 7 of my favorite flowering perennials for the sunny spot in your garden. If you saw my first video, you might have heard me say that the peony is one of my favorite flowers. So first on my list is the peony. Peonies like full sun, and they are hardy in zones 3 through 8, and here where I am in zone 8A, they do really well even in part sun. So in this bed, for example, this is the first year this peony has bloomed for me in this bed, and look how gorgeous it is. That hot pink, almost a neon pink at the edges, flower bud, or bloom I should say. Takes a couple of years for the plant to get established, so it's not a great idea to move them very often, but as the plants get larger you can divide them and move them to different locations. And as I say, this is a part sun bed. A couple years in, this plant is now blooming for me. And you don't have to do much to the peony. It doesn't need any, special care. They do very well in the clay soil that I have in my garden. I haven't done much amendment. I do try to fertilize my plants, and I use mulch, and I have started to incorporate as much compost and garden soil as I can to kind of amend the clay. But even before I was doing these things to kind of enrich the soil in my garden beds, these peonies were very hardy. So as I say, they were in my lawn, and I found them and pulled them out and put them in my garden beds, and after a couple of years they started to bloom. So as my garden beds have become, the soil has become better, the plants have gotten larger, but I think they would have done that on their own. I don't think peonies are all that fussy. I've grown them in other places where the soil was also very, not so great, and they do really well. The hardest thing about the peony is trying to keep it upright. It wants to lean out to the sun, and it often falls over. The blooms are really big, and so the blooms weigh down the stems. So you have to get creative with how you will stake these. And this is a plant that only has one bud this year. It's kind of a young plant. This must be about 2 or 3 years old. So this small cage will probably be sufficient for it this year. But as you can see, the chicken wire in the previous little section that I showed, that was not a complete failure, but I think it would have been more successful if I had raised the chicken wire up just a little bit more. Staking is definitely the biggest challenge I find with the peony. The flowers usually last about a week, and they bloom some bloom in spring and others bloom in the summer. You'll find peonies in the pink ranges, purples, reds, whites, and even yellows. I don't have any yellow peonies, but I have or purple. I don't think I have a purple peony either, but I have the pinks and reds and a couple of pale, almost white peonies. I will add that you do need to give peonies enough room for the air to move around them. They can be susceptible to mildew, so I guess that is one of the things you need to consider about peonies. And you also do need to cut them back at the end of the growing season, or at least at the end of the year, because the cold and damp weather can kind of bring in some pests and disease in the season to come. So you want to cut back the plants after it finishes blooming, or at least at the end of the summer or the fall. Cut the foliage back, and then it'll grow back new in the spring and start over. But you want to give them some good airflow so that they don't develop any kind of mildew. Number 2 on my list is the rose. Now, this may surprise some of you who know that the rose has a reputation for being not so easy to grow, and I certainly have not had great luck with roses in the past. I remember in my early 20s wanting to grow a beautiful rose garden and failing miserably because all the plants got black spot on the leaves and they yellowed, and I had a lot of trouble keeping my roses looking good. But in the more recent years, plant growers have developed this hardy variety called the knockout rose, and it is a stunningly beautiful plant, shrub rose, that blooms all summer long. Well, mid-spring it is now, and this one is already blooming. From spring till first frost, this will just keep on blooming continuously, and you can deadhead it or not. It will keep on blooming, and the flowers are this brilliant hot pink, reddish pink. It grows to a good size shrub, and in fact it grows pretty fast. I planted one in front near my front door, and it got so large last year I had to cut it back really hard, and it's doing just fine. You can cut these back really hard and they'll be just fine. I've moved these a couple of times, not this particular plant, but I did move this plant last year, so they're very hardy. Now, this rose is called the David Austin Golden Celebration, and oh my goodness, this is stunning. This year I am just in love with this plant. The flowers are incredibly big, and I think the David Austin website says that there are 75 petals on this bloom. Look at that. It's as big as my hand. It's a large rose bloom, and it is so fragrant. The David Austin website describes the fragrance as a strong tea fragrance. I don't know if I would describe it that way. I don't know. I can't especially remember what tea smells like, but I wouldn't. This isn't what would come to mind. I think it's a perfumey kind of smell, in my opinion, but not a heavy perfumey. It's just a deep, rich rose fragrance, and it is wonderful. And this plant is just gorgeous this year, and it did bloom for me last year, but this year it's even more magnificent. I've had to use this trellis to kind of support it, because you can see the stems are still a little thin, but I'm hoping that it will get stronger as it gets a little older. But this is number 2 on my list of perennials that are easy to grow and hardy, not too much work to have some beautiful flowers in your perennial garden. So if you're looking for a not too difficult flowering perennial for your garden, consider the rose. The new varieties make it much easier to have beautiful roses in your garden. You might consider starting with the knockout rose, or there's another variety called the Oh So Easy rose, or maybe you want to try a David Austin rose. There are many others. I'm not familiar with all of them, but these are a few that I have been experimenting with and finding such pleasure in seeing these beautiful flowers in my garden. And I'm particularly crazy about this one with its amazing fragrance and just big beautiful blooms. So number 2, the rose. Number 3 on my list is the allium. Now, if you have not seen these flowers before, they are really interesting and whimsical. Alliums belong to the onion and garlic family, but they are ball-shaped spheres that are made up of small little star flowers. It's a cluster of flowers on a tall stem, and they just kind of wave in the wind above your other flowers. Now this one's called the Purple Sensation, and it gets about 2 to 4 inches across, and I think this one is about 24 inches tall. It's grown by planting bulbs in the fall, and I think as I go forward I'm going to plant these in clusters of more than just one. I've up to now been planting just one little bulb here and there so that they kind of pop up in the garden, but I think I'm going to put a few in each hole that I dig going forward. Now this is a different variety called Millennium, and it's really one of my favorites because it blooms all summer long, and the bees, you can see, love this thing. This is one of the favorites of the pollinators in the garden, and I have them planted along the front of my garden bed out front. They kind of line the bed. You see this variety is kind of a clumping variety. I didn't grow these from bulbs. I grew it from a little plant, and I have about 5 on each side of the sidewalk. So there's 5 on this side and maybe 5 on the other side of the stoop. The ones on this side are smaller. They're newer plants, so they're not blooming yet. It's right beside the rose there. And then the back, you can see this tall spiky thing. That's a gladiator allium that has already flowered and lost its flower, but when it's finished it has these really interesting spiky, kind of architecturally interesting looking globes. So I just leave them. I think they're fun. But there's some more of those Millennium alliums there beside of the pink coneflowers. And I just love those. They line the front of the bed. You can see them better on the left side. Those are the older ones. Number 4 on my list is the coneflower. Oh my goodness, I love the coneflowers. This is called Echinacea, and they come in a couple of different varieties. This is a native plant, like considered a prairie native, I think. And here's one in my garden right now. I don't have any in bloom, but this is one that's returning from last year. I like the purple ones, but I also have a yellow one, and I also have a deep, kind of a red one. I don't know if it's called cayenne, something like that. It's kind of spicy, I don't have a picture of it here, but when it blooms I'll try to show you that later in another video. But the purple is my favorite, and they get really kind of hard little spikes. The seeds kind of form a spiky seed head, and the birds love these seeds. So as the flowers kind of fade and die away and the plant kind of declines, the seeds are really attractive to the birds. So you'll see a lot of birds come to this plant, and I always leave the seeds for the birds. But the flowers last a very long time. Once it starts blooming, it blooms throughout most of the summer. And it's pretty easy to grow. I do have a little pressure from rabbits. The rabbits seem to like this plant, so I have to sometimes put something around it. In fact, there's 2 of the plants in the front this year that have been nibbled on by the rabbits, so I hope they make it. I need to maybe go out there and put some kind of little fence up around them or something to kind of keep the rabbits out. But it's one of my favorites. I just think it's so bright and cheerful, and they're great cut plants. These are really beautiful to cut and put in a vase. I do that a lot. I don't do it so much now that I have cats, because cats like to nibble on everything, so I'm always try to be careful not to put plants in the house that might hurt the cats. I've forgotten totally what number we're on. I think we're on number 5, but this is Coreopsis. And I don't believe I have any video footage of the Coreopsis, but this is a mounding perennial that is low, about probably 20 inches, maybe a little taller. And it gets these bright sun-colored small flowers all over it, and it stays in bloom throughout the summer. Now here's a couple of mounds you can see on this. This is a former garden I had at a different house, but you can see I have 2 little mounds there, and they're nice and bright, and these will spread over time. You can divide them, and it doesn't affect how soon they start flowering again. The ones that I've divided just flower again the next season. Here's one that's spread out pretty good. You can see they kind of make a nice big large clump. Coreopsis likes full sun, and again, it's not very fussy about the soil. It does very well here in our clay soil. It's hardy in zones 3 through 9. So try Coreopsis. Number 6 on my list of favorite perennials are lilies. Now what you're looking at here is the calla lily, and while it is not a true lily, it is still one of my favorites. And these are hardy in zones 8 through 10, so where I live this is a perennial, but for others of you it may be an annual or a plant that you will need to take up in the winter and store inside and then bring it back out in the spring again. But the true lilies are the oriental lily. One of my favorites is the stargazer lily and the Asiatic lilies. I have this red variety and a yellow one, and these bloom earlier in the year, and they're not quite as tall as the stargazers. I only had that one snippet of video of the stargazers. I'll see if I can put it up again. But the stargazers can get up to 4 feet tall, and these are a star-shaped flower. They're really good in cut flower arrangements, and they last a good long time in a cut flower arrangement. But they the oriental variety has a really beautiful fragrance. They're almost too strong. If you plant the stargazer lily, you might want to move it away from your front door. I planted mine by the front door, and it was a little too strong coming and going into the house, so I moved it around to the corner of the house. But they're very fragrant and really beautiful. And you can see this one is I believe this is an Asiatic variety, and they get quite bushy. They get thicker as time goes on. This is one that could be divided, and they're very stout plants. They don't need much once they're established. They may struggle a little in the beginning. I have some in my newer garden beds that are taking a while to get established, but once they do get established, they perform really well. And what are we on? 7 on my list is the clematis. Now the clematis is a vine. I think there may be bush varieties now out, I'm not sure, but the ones I'm most familiar with are the clematis vines, and these do die back every year, but they come back, and each year they become more vigorous, and they take off quicker, so they get hardier as time goes on and perform better and better. But this one is called Nellie Moser, and I showed it in my first video, and it's they say clematis like their feet in the shade and their heads in the sun, so it's a good idea. As you can see, this one is planted kind of under a rose bush, and they do need to be on a trellis of some kind so that they can climb upwards. But they're beautiful plants that are kind of the showstopper if you get one to do well. So the clematis definitely makes my top 7 list of my favorite perennials for the flower garden. I hope this video has been helpful to you, that you learned something, or that you are emboldened to try one of these flowers in your garden. And if you have any questions, or you know something that I did not mention, if you have any information that could help me as a gardener, I'd love it if you'd leave me a comment down below. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm hoping to put a new video out every week, and your encouragement is much appreciated. I am very grateful for those of you who have already subscribed, and those who are leaving comments and watching my videos. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much, and I'll see you again in the next video.